Mark, we'll take some questions. Please don't be shy.
I just wonder, are there any American political leaders on the scene today that you feel truly understand the threat as you've described it, and that might lead this country in a way that would protect us against that threat?
I'm sure there are. I don't know who they are.
Okay.
I assume that we have people in Washington who know things that I don't know. But I think I do understand. I should tell you in all honesty, when I saw the towers fall, it changed my life to the extent that I began doing a lot of serious research and a lot of serious writing. Because I couldn't understand how people could hate us so much. It bothered me. I didn't understand it. I mean, America's way of solving problems historically was you just throw money at them. And it just didn't work. I mean, they wanted to kill, they weren't happy with 3,000, they wanted to kill 3 million. Do we understand what we're dealing with? I don't think so. I think that when the next catastrophe happens, and it will, whether it's New York or Chicago or Los Angeles or Miami, then we will understand the nature of the enemy whom we confront. I want to be clear on something. We are fighting an enemy that has no uniform, that has no capital, that has no country. We've never fought a war like that before. We are fighting people who want to undo what the Crusades did. They're leading their own crusade. Do our leaders understand that? I don't know. They seem to be fighting this war the way we play whack-a-mole, if you know what I mean. You ever play whack-a-mole? You know, you're at a place and a little thing comes up and you slam it. And then another one comes up and you slam it again, and another one and you slam it again. These are religiously motivated people who believe in their heart of hearts that they are fulfilling the work of Allah. That's why during the tsunami disaster, when America went in with the best of intentions to provide aid to millions and millions of Muslims whose lives were devastated by the tsunami, the radical Islamists gave the instruction by fatwa, by decree, that they wanted the Americans killed. Why? Because the tsunami occurred because the Muslims in Indonesia and South Asia were apostates. They didn't toe the line. They were not sufficiently faithful, and therefore Allah had willed them to die. And America, by going in there and trying to help them, was trying to fight the will of Allah. Now, what does that mean? It means that in order to defeat an enemy like this, and that's why I can't answer your question, in order to defeat an enemy who believes that the murder of innocents is justified by their interpretation of the Quran, they must be vanquished. They must be totally destroyed to the point where they throw up their arms and they say, we have been defeated, we cannot go on being what we have been, and it is the will of Allah. Because until we reach that point, there will be a war the likes of which we have never known. And I, for one, am not happy because I have small children, and you have children, or you may have, or you will have, and nobody wants their children to die in this kind of a war. But the truth is, we have never fought an enemy like this before. And the only way to really fight the war that we are capable of fighting, and by the way, I say the same for Israel vis-a-vis Hamas, the only way that we could fight this kind of war is if you have a massive catastrophe. And now that we have evacuated, Israel has evacuated Gaza and the West Bank, you have a situation where Katyusha rockets are being brought in that can hit Ashkelon. And if they do, there is a potential of a horrible catastrophe because there are chemical plants there, some oil, major oil refineries, everything else. And in November, when I took a mission over to Israel, we came up the Ayalon Freeway and passed the Ayalon, the Azrieli Towers. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the Azrieli Towers. They're the Israeli equivalent to the World Trade Center. Beautiful, tall, round buildings, millions of lights and everything else. And Hamas, Al-Qaeda has said that they will take them down the way they took down the World Trade Center. That is a catastrophe. What would it take to fight the kind of war that we will be required to fight? It will take a catastrophe. Would any leader get elected today who would say this? Never. Never.
I just wanted to ask if you really think, you said that the problem is naivety, and I really want to know if you think it's naivety or if it's cowardness, and I'm not talking about the US, especially about Europe, because, you know, what happened in Paris is only one thing, and probably it's the beginning. And sometimes I think, and I think many people believe that, you know, the Europeans think that, you know, if they will pacify these things right now, and they wouldn't say anything about Jewish people, maybe the Muslims will be quiet, and that's how it's going to be over. So maybe, I don't know if they don't understand that that's not the end of it, because these people understand the language of power, or they don't want to understand it.
It's a good question. The only way I can answer it is, I think in terms of the U.S. administration, it is naivety that they are now trying to correct. They don't quite know how. There is discussion now in inner circles within Washington to sever the war on terrorism from the democratization process. That means that we're going to go after them, big time, terrorism, but that democracy, they recognize what I've said here, will take 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So they're going to go on two different things. Now that's a change from the original Bush doctrine that said you can do them all at once. They've learned since in Iraq that it's going to take a hell of a lot longer to democratize the Middle East than it will to defeat terrorism. Terrorism is a pressing issue, you have to deal with it. Now Europe is another issue. Europe's another issue because if you read a lot of studies, particularly Batior's study on Arabia, she's predicting really by the year 2040, and she's not alone, Oriana Fallaci wrote a book on this as well, that the Muslim birth rate is increasing. You've got 20 million Muslims there. They have not been incorporated into European society. The Europeans have spent in the last 30 years bringing in cheap labor to subsidize their social programs. And now what they're finding out is these people, because they have not been incorporated into European society, are becoming radicalized. I mean, the shock of London during their subway bombings was that these were native Brits. Richard Reed, who put a bomb in his shoe, so every time you go through a metal detector, you go into an airport, they ask you to take your shoes off. You can thank Richard Reed for that. Right? He was the guy who really started that whole process by putting an Al-Qaeda bomb into his heel a couple of Decembers ago with a flight, an Air France flight coming to New York. So the bottom line is, in Europe, it is an issue of cowardice. And the issue of cowardice has come out in a number of ways. It has come out, we saw during the Danish cartoon Jihad. It's called the Danish cartoon Jihad. During that thing, and I wrote an article that's on my website. I went and did a lot of research on this. I wanted to read really everything that was out there in the world before I wrote my article, and I did. And it really incorporates all of these arguments that it's not a matter of the British and the Europeans generally will tell you that they're not going to run these jihad cartoons because we choose not to offend. Well, you know what? The truth is that there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the world that's offensive to Jews, part of which I read to you. The Christians aren't doing much better. You had something called, it was an art exhibit called Piss Christ, where they had Christ on a cross, upside down in a bottle of urine. It was a huge article that the Boston Globe, I believe, took the position it was entitled to some kind of federal subsidy as a work of art. Well, the only reason for mentioning this is because Jews and Christians, and Buddhists for that matter, don't kill other Buddhists who go to Burger King, even though they consider cows sacred. Okay? We don't go around torching embassies or stamping on Danish flags. We don't do that. But they do that. The radicals do that. And the reason that they do that has a lot to do with the nature of the war in which we're involved. And that is quite simply that the Jews and the Christians have been through a lot over the last centuries. And we have learned from that experience. And when we read, forgive me, the 9th blessing of the Shema Esrei, which I think was Rabbi Gamliel II, which was written 1,000 years ago, a couple thousand years ago, because the Essenes and other groups were telling the Romans nasty things about the Jews. Okay, the difference is that we understand that these things were written by Jews and by Christians thousands of years ago. We live in the 21st century. The Islamics read it and believe that it is their demand and their requirement by Allah to deal with it as if it was today. We are dealing with an enemy that wishes to take us back to the Dark Ages. And in Europe, it is cowardice, in part because they are surrounded by an alienated Muslim community that will not be absorbed. And in the States, it is naivety. America is probably the last nation in the world that should have ever been an empire. We're just really much too nice. And we're dealing with some really nasty people.
I agree 100% with your assessment of the nature of the enemy. And I do agree that the United States is extremely naive. Okay. However, I was in Israel. I didn't find the Israelis naive. I would say most Israelis know you cannot negotiate with the Palestinians. And yet the Israelis, who cannot be called naive about the nature of the Palestinians, are still engaging in conciliatory behavior as well. They're about to give up, if Olmert has his way, they're going to give up the West Bank. They're going to give large sections of the West Bank. So I don't, it's like I would not attribute our paralysis to naivete. It's simply because of another factor that you mentioned, that we're dealing with an enemy that we don't know how to fight. We don't have the military technology to deal with it. It's a technological issue. We don't know how to deal with this enemy without wiping out entire civilian populations. So in other words, I think that the driving force is not attitudinal naivete, because the Americans have it, but the Israelis don't. But the Israelis are just as powerless, even though they're not naive. So it may be more a matter that we just don't know how to deal with this enemy without a uniform.
Let me answer this way. The world has changed a lot since the Second World War. Imagine, for example, if you had CNN on the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944. The announcements that would be heard in Washington would be, my God, 7,000 Americans died today on the beaches of Normandy. What is Eisenhower doing? He is the leader of our military, and he lets our people die. The blood of Americans is now pouring over the beaches of Normandy. Immediately thereafter, a commission would be set up. They would have recalled Eisenhower, probably court-martialed him, and there would be a Nazi flag flying over the White House. Same has to do with Dresden. Okay? America realized that in dealing with the Nazis, their 9/11 was December 7, 1941, and they decided that they were going to fight the war, and they had to fight to win, because if they lost, they would lose more than the war, they would lose their civilization, and the Nazis would rule the world. And so they firebombed Dresden. You can't firebomb a city today. At least, not until there is such a catastrophe that Americans are willing to tell the ACLU and everybody else, I'm sorry, I'm just not listening to you anymore. They just murdered 1 million of our people, and we're going after them.
There are people today that will argue that what we did at Hiroshima and Nagasaki
that's
was horrendous,
yes.
that it was inhumane. Yet any military strategist will tell you it saved tens of thousands of American lives, because in the islands the Japanese fought right to the last man, and they didn't care about whether they lived or died.
Right.
They were going to kill as many Americans or Allied soldiers as they could.
Right.
And the only way we stopped that nonsense was to obliterate Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which was horrific and made the emperor resign, basically.
Right, and you should know, there's a huge article that I just had published in the Ariel Center for Policy Research on 25 years of appeasement after Tehran. And what it does is it really, I'm very meticulous when I do my stuff. It's all footnoted and documented, and it's not emotional. And you can't publish stuff if it's emotional. Otherwise, it's not credible, at least not in scholarly journals. And what it does is it goes through all the lessons that Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen, basically in Afghanistan, learned by watching America. And they learned that if you can create a few body bags, the media can do the rest. Now, I'm not condemning the media. It is the nature of our society to be open. But there's a price to be paid for the openness. And when you're dealing with an enemy who doesn't care if they kill millions because they justify it in the name of Allah, and yet they have learned from Beirut, we killed 245 Americans the night that the barracks came down, and then in Somalia, where you had 18 Americans and then America pulled out of Somalia, they see that as weakness. And when we withdrew, the Israelis withdrew from Gaza, and if they withdraw from the West Bank, all it does is it plays into their idea that only the weak withdraw. And that's why Hamas can tell the world, as they did a couple of days ago, we will vanquish Israel. It's because they don't worry about CNN. As a matter of fact, they want CNN there because they understand that our media in the 21st century is not prepared to deal with the kind of war that they are prepared to wage. And I'm not saying that we should firebomb and drop atomic bombs, but what I am saying is that in the terrible arithmetic of war, if you do not deal with the problem at the beginning, you're going to pay at the end.
In today's Wall Street Journal, there is a column, an article, and the title of the article is "The Last Helicopter," and it alludes to exactly the argument that you just made, Mogadishu and the other areas where we pulled out because of too many body bags. And the problem that the radical Arab leaders and the fanatics have with George Bush is that he won't give up. But they also know that in 2.5 years or so, he's gone. And they don't believe the next president, Republican or Democratic, will have the stomach to continue this fight. And so their attitude is just keep at it, keep putting as many bodies out there as we can, and when the next president comes in, the American people will demand that they pull out of Iraq and Afghanistan. It's an interesting article, today's Wall Street Journal.
Right, and I mean, that's how I feel. Rightly or wrongly, that's how I feel. There's a military historian by the name of Victor Davis Hanson who wrote an interesting article in the Hoover Institute, which is out of Stanford, where he talks about these concepts. He talks about war, defeat, and stalemate. And he cites the Korean War as a stalemate. He cites the first Iraqi war as a stalemate. Why? Because nothing changed. You just had a lot of dead people lying there, but nothing changed. You didn't change the government, you didn't change the regime, you didn't do anything. All you did was have a lot of dead people. And he also cited all the Israeli wars with the Arabs. Why do these Arabs keep coming back? Why are there all these wars? He said, because the Arabs have never been vanquished. They have never thrown up their hands and said, we cannot go on being what we have been. We have lost, whether it's because of Allah or other reasons, or it's because mothers begin caring for their children, whatever. Until the concept of vanquishment sinks into the mindset of an enemy, you are still at war. And that, by the way, is my problem with what went on in giving up Gaza, and if they're going to give up the West Bank, because it's going to send the wrong signal to the wrong people in the wrong part of the world.
Last time I was watching C-SPAN, which is about the only place I can get a feel for what's really happening in the world. And the new head of Hamas, who's the head of the government there, I forget his name or what it's called, prime minister or whatever, was speaking. And he sounded like a 1930s Stalinist talking about democracy in the Soviet Union. I mean, he was waxing eloquent about the need for institutions and the judiciary and all this. And behind that, he was also asking for money. Okay, he was clearly saying we need support. And it seems like there is an opportunity to starve the Palestinians, you know, by not giving aid. And that in and of itself, the other thing I heard between the lines of what we were saying is we could not get elected again if we can't improve the economy here. We can't improve the economy unless we get some investment and so on and so forth. And I think
we as Hamas.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was somewhat comical to me, but he was serious. And I wondered if we are prepared to starve them.
Well, I'm cynical enough, having lived in Israel and done work there, I'm cynical enough to believe that the Europeans, at least, will find a way to get money to Hamas, if only to appease their own Muslim populations. The concept, you make an interesting point. I just submitted a paper to the Middle East Quarterly in Philadelphia, which they're reviewing now. And I talked to Dan Pipes, who is the head of Middle East Quarterly, and I said, the article suggests what you do. That is, that we basically starve them to death so the regime will fall and they'll realize that so long as they have a terrorist government that does not recognize Israel, and does not recognize its previous commitments and all of that, it will be discredited. That people are starving in the streets, they've still got potholes, and everything else. That's what I see in the article. I don't entirely believe that to be true. I think that what you have here is a fundamentally genocidal society that has been training its kids through public funds for years that the most important thing that they can do in their life is to become a human grenade. And that, to me, is a situation that cannot be rectified through economic, political, and diplomatic sanctions. Personally, I think that it is a society that is fundamentally flawed, as was German society after World War II. And I think what's going to happen, is there will be a terrible catastrophe in Israel. And Israel will be occupying Gaza and the West Bank. And it's not going to be pretty. But they will stay there. And they will do, over a period of years, what was done in Germany and Japan. They will create a new leadership. And they will start at the bottom and a new phoenix will rise from the ashes. I honestly believe that there is no alternative to that. The fact that the Palestinians have elected a terrorist government, for whatever reason you may attribute to it, does not take away from the fact that the Palestinians have elected a terrorist government. And there's something flawed in such a society.
I have to just say again, in some ways, I'm more comfortable with Hamas being the government than Fatah and Arafat, because I think at least they're more honest about where they're at, where I think Arafat's intentions were exactly the same.
Right. Well, they are. The only difference is Arafat knew how to play the crowd.
Exactly.
Hamas doesn't know how to play the crowd. And that's really causing a problem for a lot of Western nations who are happy to play the game. I mean, what people don't know is the Palestinian Authority received more money than Marshall received to rebuild Europe. And Marshall rebuilt Europe. The Palestinians still live in cesspools. Why? Because Marshall knew what he was doing. And he rebuilt Europe. And that's what the Marshall Plan was all about. He had just as much money going to Palestinian Authority, and they're no further ahead. Because they had corrupt leadership, they didn't understand democracy, the whole 9 yards. And I think that you have a fundamentally flawed society. Look, I don't like war, nobody likes war, but sometimes war is necessary. And I think that in time, America and Israel will recognize that it's time to seek victory.
I have two